In June, actually on the 15th of June in 1991, I traveled for a short camping trip with a longtime friend of mine to Sedona, Arizona. While in Sedona, Arizona, I had my first conscious experience of contact. We were camping in a very remote area, very rustic, and to my knowledge, no other people were around for many miles. We'd gone a long distance to find this remote camping area, and down a long dirt road. It was alongside of a creek, and nobody else was present in the area. It was dusk. We set up our camp. We had a lot of camping equipment and cooler and food and lanterns and chairs we set out, and a lot of our personal belongings. There was a very rustic camping table there, like a picnic table there. And so we kept all of our belongings outside. We weren't concerned because nobody was around. We sat out for a few hours that night. We had a fire. We ate. I went to bed a little earlier than her. We were traveling in a Toyota bus, a van that had a sliding side door and the back door that lifted straight up and out. It was probably, I went to bed first, and then I recall her coming in. I could hear her getting into her sleeping bag. And we were sleeping side by side, the length of the van in the back. And I'm not quite certain what time it was, but I believe it was after 12. And I heard a sound and saw the light go on, and I realized that the back door had opened up and swung wide. And the next thing that I saw, I was coming to, I was very sleepy. I got up and started to sit up, and the next thing I saw was a hand reaching towards me, a gray, kind of pasty gray-white hand. And the thing that I noticed most, it was a very small hand, and it had only 3 fingers with a thumb. And it was reaching towards me. And I was very much in shock, horrified, frightened. I couldn't grasp what was happening. And the next thing I knew, I don't recall this hand actually touching me, but I do believe that I was pulled out of the van. Next thing I knew, I was standing at the very back end. The light was on in the van. I recall as I went out, my friend wasn't moving. She was lying with her eyes closed, and as I was taken out of the van, I stood at the end of the van, and I had difficulty looking up. I couldn't raise my head fully, but I had a sense that standing in front of me was a very tall, very powerful figure. A masculine figure that felt very threatening to me. On each side of me was a very small being. Hairless, smooth skin, large black eyes, very delicate in nature. There was one on each side of me. They probably came barely up to my chest in height. And I had my hands, I felt very somewhat paralyzed and stiff. I couldn't move my body. I was just standing up straight. And I noticed that they had I was looking downwards towards the ground, and I could see that their hands were underneath my hands, not touching me, but by placing their hands underneath mine, they seemed to be able to be emitting some type of energy that was actually keeping me raised up off the ground 4 or 5 inches. And I recall standing there. It was probably one of the most, if not the most frightening, terrified moment of my life. It was a moment-to-moment experience in that second. There was no possibility of thinking. I was pure raw awareness while this was happening. Not really able to think it through or grasp it. And then I began to move forward. And as I moved forward, I still could only slightly glance to the left and right of me. And they were somehow keeping me off the ground, propelling me forward. And as I looked slightly backwards, I could see similar small beings, creatures off to the side and around me. So there were more of them in the area, and they were just looking at us as we moved forward. I recalled moving, what looked like we were moving along a dirt path and heading towards some woods. I could see what looked like shrubs towards the ground, but I kept feeling something hit my face. I didn't know what was hitting my face, and all I could see ahead was a light, a very, very bright white light, far ahead in the distance. The next memory that I had, the next recollection I had, was somewhere around 3:30 in the morning, and I felt like I was dropped. I was sitting awake inside the van, sitting up, drenched in sweat, barefoot outside of the sleeping bag, sitting and shaking violently, and in a tremendous amount of emotional and mental turmoil. Experiencing something I had absolutely no reference for, couldn't get a handle on, was arguing back and forth in my mind. I was sobbing, I was crying, I was arguing back and forth in my mind that, trying to tell myself this had to be a dream, but I knew better than that. I have spent many years as one of my hobbies in studying brain and learning enhancement and using a variety of techniques and tools and meditation, and this just was not a dream, and I knew it. I wanted it to be. I desperately wanted it to be. But as I sat there, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, and I would bet my life on it, that I had just been taken from the van by a non-human entity in physical form, and it had just happened. And it was physical and it was real. I tried very hard by shaking to wake up my friend. I could not wake her up. I was unable to move her, wake her up. I yelled at her. I actually physically shook her body and couldn't wake her up. I was terrified to be alone. I felt they were coming back again. I was absolutely scared to death. There was no logic to any of it, and I just kept praying and waiting for the light to come. And I sat there looking out the window, shaking violently, crying periodically, anticipating them coming back. The light came, dawn. It was summertime, so it was fairly early, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I opened the van and I jumped outside. And I paced back and forth, and I went back to the van again to get my friend, and finally she roused and she came out. We'd been friends many years. We'd also been involved in a lot of spiritual study and pursuits together. And I told her what I believed had happened. She was very sympathetic, not judgmental at all. She's very open-minded, and she had been exposed, as had I, to a variety of metaphysical studies over the years too, and we're neither for nor against such ideas of extraterrestrial contact. She tried to calm me, and we noticed fairly quickly as we looked around that at the belongings out there, that I soon realized all of my personal effects were gone, and only my personal effects. I had bags with my clothing, tennis shoes, towel, anything that had been mine, my bathing suit, was all gone. We searched the area. None of the food, none of the equipment that had actual value. Had somebody happened along, a human being happened along, you would think they would take something that would have value. The things they took that were missing certainly had no monetary value. So we searched the area, a very wide section, all the way down to the creek, off into the woods. I hypothesized different possibilities, what could have happened. Had an animal come, why would they take all of my things? I wanted an answer. I wanted it to be that. We never found anything of mine, nothing. Subsequent to this, within a year, I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I had been very compelled to move there. I moved there by myself without any contacts there. It was a very radical action on my part. I was driven to do this within a matter of months, I planned it after this experience in Sedona. I wasn't sure why, and as soon as I arrived there, I began to have very active contact, ongoing contact. And once I was there within that first year, although I had told no one, I did go to see a therapist and a hypnotherapist, and I did not tell her what had happened to me, but I was regressed on this one occasion. And she took me back to that night, and I was able to describe more detail about the experience and the white light as we approached it under hypnosis and described it. One of the things I think is very curious is that I have had, since these conscious events happened, particularly in the last 5-6 years, I've had a half a dozen, around that 6-7 hypnotic regressions, and I've been very impressed with the fact that with all the information I consciously recall from my experiences, there has never been anything contradicted under hypnosis, only enhanced, which was very impressive to me, I thought, because I wasn't sure how I felt about hypnosis. I tended to trust my own mental process more, but I was happy to see that it indeed enhanced it. In this case, when I went to see this woman this therapist in Santa Fe, we attempted on 2 occasions to regress me to that night. And each time we got a little bit more information. I was able to do some drawings and some tapes. She did recordings. Those subsequently disappeared, all of those. I discovered that that light was indeed emanating from a craft, a saucer-type craft. I recalled going into the craft. I recalled an examination, being on a table. I recalled seeing a lot of equipment. I recalled another being besides the Greys in the background that appeared to be supervising the abduction, the event, and the examination. Each time she tried on these 2 occasions to regress me, I became so uncontrollably hysterical she had to stop. My arms were flailing, my body was reacting. When we get to the point where there was an examination ensuing, it was something she was afraid for me, so she brought me out, both of those instances, and we never tried again. It was a number of years later with Barbara Lamb that I finally attempted some regression, starting in 2004. I could not categorize this experience. I'd been fascinated with psychology my whole life and had been very involved in a lot of other kinds of work. I worked with the homeless. I worked in recovery with teens with drug addiction, and I had been a student of psychology, and I could not fit this experience. I could not classify it. It didn't fit into any terms for me, into any standard definition for me. So what I did basically is that I continued to have experiences, but I fought them. I wouldn't talk about them, didn't share them, and off and on for the next probably the next 15 years, I had ongoing experiences, consciously recalled probably. I could have 3 or 4 a month. I think the longest that I would go without a conscious recollection of having some kind of contact would maybe be 6 months that I was conscious. It has continued to this day. It's taken a different form over time. As time has gone on, one of the things that has happened to me in spring of 2004 is when I came out of the closet, so to speak, and I'd had enough, and I made a conscious decision to seek answers. During that time is when I initially joined MUFON, met Barbara Lamb, and began to share with a number of people what had happened to me. I would say over time my contacts have changed. The relationships with various beings have changed. There have been some ongoing relationships with several types of beings that have appeared throughout these years. I initially, with a lot of fear, it appeared to me that it was a repetitive physical examination, something related to procreation. There was a lot of experiences that suggested that my eggs were being taken, that I had encounters with hybrid entities. It had been suggested to me that one that I had met I was related to, that was my daughter, so to speak. So initially, a lot of what I had seen related to that. Physiology, physical testing, repeatedly. There was a lot of emotional. They seemed to have a tremendous fascination for the emotional makeup of humans. There was a lot of instances I was subjected to where some were real, some were not. That seemed like a test, an emotional test, watching to see how I'd react. There was certainly a lot of, as time went on, these contacts seemed to change. Particularly, I noticed that after I reached menopause, there was a very big difference. The physical examinations, if indeed this was egg extraction, that stopped, and suddenly it became a different contact entirely. There was a lot of psychological testing that went on. I was shown a lot of information. I was shown pictures on screens. I was indoctrinated in certain ways that almost seemed like classroom, very foggy, but kind of classroom situations where I was being almost given some type of instruction as to how I would behave in a certain circumstance in order to aid them and support them. I feel that as I look at it now, and it's been, the last 6 years has been a very consciously addressing it. I have 15 years that I recorded my experiences. I continue to record them in writing. Sometimes when I have an experience, there is so much detail that I recall when I come back. I'm a meditator. I use sound and light machines. I use various techniques. I've used sensory deprivation tanks. I've been sort of a student of the mind in another area because I'm very fascinated with the human mind, so I've used techniques to try to enhance my learning skills. As a result, it's given me some extra little edges, I think, in the many years of meditating to be able to pay more attention when these things happen, and when I come back I record them. And now sometimes it's 45 minutes to an hour and a half of information that I come back with. Sometimes there's so much information that I'm actually using voice recordings now, as opposed to just even trying to write it out because I'm afraid of losing the information. My experiences of contact have been almost what I might count as 4 different types of contact. One indeed is a physical variety, like what happened to me in the van, taken from the van. What I look at myself is the conscious recall. I look at how does my mind store this information? How does it reveal the information back to me? That to me is kind of a clue as to, was this a physical experience also? Certainly I've had physical experiences afterwards. Some of my physical contacts have resulted in me waking up in different areas, different parts of the house, on the floor. I've had prolific nosebleeds and ear bleeding afterwards. I have had many marks and small, very thin cut marks all along my forearms. These are types of physical things that I have awakened with when I have a recollection that tells me this was indeed a physical contact. And the way that I feel confident to say that it's a physical contact is because it seems to be stored in my mind in the exact same way as it would be if I was recalling later my sitting here, as though I left one room and walked right into another. It feels that clear. that lucid to me. Another type of variety is one that I actually feel that my body did not leave the bed. It takes place usually at night, and whereas some of the physical ones do not take place during the night. I've even had one in the middle of the day during a lunchtime where I disappeared for 2 hours during lunch, and I came to in another part of town in my car. That's some type of physical experience. With the others, I would refer to it, I suppose, as an astral experience. I feel that I'm actually in another location, but I cannot sense my body about me. But fully consciously, I feel like I'm there. I can look around, I can see the craft, the area I'm in, I can look at the different beings, I can record information. It's very clear to me. But still, I can't get a sense of my body in those. So if indeed there was such a thing as an astral removal of the life force, that's the only way I could possibly describe it. There is another type where it always happens when I'm sleeping. I feel as though I have been contacted, not necessarily removed physically or astrally from my location, but it's as though something from outside has tapped into my psyche and given me information. I am certainly one of those. I have the repeat digits happen to me all the time, the 1111, the 111, and when that happens, I have a sensation almost as though information is either being downloaded or uploaded from me. Everything stops in that moment for a few seconds. Boom, my eyes are at the clock, I see the time, and everything stops for a moment. That can happen at any time during the day. So I feel that there's some type of ongoing contact and a variety of methods taking place. My initial experience has been initially in the first few years of this. Now, mind you, I had no prior reference to this. Very little exposure to certainly no exposure to the study of this. But later on, some of the reference I got I gathered from MUFON, some of the other information I picked up. Initial contact would be what would be standardly called grays, 3.5 feet tall, gray type beings, automatons. They seem to operate together. They don't seem independent. They don't seem to be independent thinkers. They seem just almost programmed, robotic, to do certain tasks. There are some of those that they seem to have different. It seems as though they're carrying out activities at the direction of several other beings. One being the tall white that I refer to as the tall white, that seems very cold, removed in the background, analyzing, analytical, seems to have very little regard for human beings, almost a disdain for them. I've had no direct contact except to see them present in the background. And it seems as though the Greys are doing some type of work to the benefit or their direction. The other type of being I've seen has been what I've later understood is referred to as reptilians. They definitely have a reptile quality to them. They're very large. They're probably 6.5 feet tall, very muscular, very large, very big, menacing, have a very bad scent, a very bad odor to them, greenish gray, scaly skin. They also have appeared a number of times, and they have a very strong warrior quality about them. They also have directed the Greys in some of my encounters. Some of the behavior of the Greys have been interesting. And it's strange that for some reason there seems to be an ability to determine or to be able to differentiate between the sexes. Even though they look identical, you seem to be able to tell a female from a male. early on, during the earlier years, the first 10, 12 years this was happening when I was keeping this to myself, there was still a tremendous amount of fear, and there was always what I would think would be a female assigned to me that would be assigned specifically to calm you. And it seemed that part of their calming technique, so this is the only sensitivity I noticed in the Greys, was these females that seemed to be assigned to keep you calm. There was some telepathic interaction to calm you, but they also had a way of holding your inner arm, your wrist and your inner arm. That has been repeated for me with both of my arms, but particularly my right arm, where in my early encounters for many years, there was somebody holding on to my wrist and right at the bend of my elbow on the inside during these things that had some type of physical effect or calming effect, I believe, on my neural system somehow, or on my nervous system rather. Strangely enough, this was certainly repeated many, many times, and I think it's very curious, it may or may not be related, but I have had 4 surgeries on my arm, and specifically on the ulnar nerves that run through the elbow area. They have had to move them because they have started to die in both of my arms. I cannot say that this is directly related, but it's quite unusual to have these nerves affected this way. So I have so far had 4 surgeries on my right arm. And that is, I have many, many recollections of my arm being used during these times, and several other things being done to my arm.
But do they, while you're there in the crafts, are you able to, I mean, are you fully conscious like we are sitting here now?
My state of consciousness during contacts, when I have been either physically abducted or my consciousness has been taken, if that's possible, when I'm still very lucid, it has improved over the years. Initially, with a great deal of fear, of course, you know, I've shut out as much as I could because I was not able to accept what was happening. As time has gone on, and certainly in the last 6 years, where I have been consciously and aggressively addressing this matter in my life and becoming very realistic about it, or at least willing to investigate it fully, I have become more and more alert and aware and able to stay conscious and present. If I was to measure my consciousness, say, right now, and say we measured it at a 10, my awareness and awakeness, I would say in the early years, my ability to stay conscious might have been a 2. As time has gone on, I've gotten better and better and better at it, which seems to be something they marvel at, actually. In my encounters, it has actually been a topic that has come up. I would say that my ability to stay awake is now probably a 7, maybe an 8 at best. It's not that you can maintain it fully throughout the experience, but I will fight it very, very strong. Fight to stay awake, fight to stay conscious. And I might be able to maintain that for 10 minutes perhaps, where I can stay and I can see and I take in as much as I possibly can around me. And then the fog can set in. And it's a struggle. It's definitely a struggle to stay alert and conscious during these things. I am absolutely able to, I have fought back, I have communicated back, I have expressed my anger. I am not a particularly combative person. I'm more on the logical side and analytical, and I interact that way. So in these experiences, I am more emotionally, more psychologically interacting back and saying, no, I don't like this, I don't want to do this, I resist this. And as time has gone on, I began to ask questions, many, many questions, and try to get answers back. They don't seem particularly interested. I have at this point been exposed to 7 different species. Once I came out of the closet, where originally I had only interaction with 3, there has been 7 now that I've had interactions with. Basically, I would say they have no interest whatsoever in letting me know what they're doing. They're more manipulative in trying to give me an idea or trying to suggest or lead me to believe certain things. There is only one entity that has repeatedly appeared throughout my entire experience, and that is an entity that has been very involved in training and having me I sit at tables. I have different types of audio equipment, unusual audio equipment that's set in front of me. I have machines that have been set in front of me, and it's always the same. I have seen only one of this type of species, and it is also something I later learned of that others have seen, and it is what I would call the insectoid or praying mantis type. Strangely enough, it seems as though I've been assigned this particular being, because this being has been with me a long time, and it is the same being that is always sitting across the table, because over time it's no longer about the physical examinations, it's about a lot of psychological testing and training. Sometimes other people, human beings, are in the room, but this particular entity is always there. He seems over time to actually have some kind of fondness for me, and I have gotten some information back from this one only, direct information back. None of the beings that I've interacted with have displayed anything that human beings, anything similar to a human being's emotional makeup. None of them. The praying mantis insectoid figure that I have repeatedly been in contact with seems to be very calm, certainly analytical, but seems to have, and there's no facial gestures or muscle movements of the faces to indicate anything in any of these entities that I've seen, none whatsoever. But you can pick up, like I said, you can pick up male and female, you can pick up extra pieces of information. In this particular being that looked very much like a praying mantis, not attractive at all, nothing that we would relate to, there is a very strong sense of compassion, a very strong sense of interest that goes beyond clinical. And I almost feel an odd sense of that this being is oddly proud of me, as though I am an ongoing project of his. And again, I feel as though it's a masculine figure. I have no idea why I would feel that, but I do feel that. I think if you were to sort of equate it with what goes on the planet Earth, we have a variety. We have human beings with a variety of agendas. I think that these species also have a variety of agendas. I think that certainly that some tend to be more aggressive and warrior-like. I think some, one of the really strong senses that I get is overall tall whites, reptilians. This reptilian type of being has no regard for us, very little regard for us, really is not interested in us. It's a very strong sense of overpowering, analytical, warrior-like, with just very little regard. When it comes to several of the others that I have seen, I would say that as far as an agenda, the feeling is that they're coming. I get a sense from my experiences that we are going to have open contact within the next few years with one or more species. I get a sense that we are being prepared. A number of human beings have been contacted, and we are being prepared. Some type of subliminal programming is taking place, that we may perhaps, at the proper time that works for them, perhaps when contact takes place, we will be set onto some automatic pilot where we will react and work with them. My impression is that there is a cataclysmic event that is going to take place. I have been shown pictures on screens that appear in rooms. The impression I have been left with, obviously none of this is something I can prove, but the impression I've been left with is that an asteroid was going to hit the planet. And that when this asteroid hits the planet, it is going to affect the planet worldwide. A lot of people will die, continents will shift, and a lot of people will be temporarily removed from the planet in safekeeping measures. To that end, I would say that some of these beings may have a desire to preserve the human race, to assist in preserving the human race. It has also been alluded to me in several of my experiences that there may be some others during this time, maybe an opportunistic moment for some other races to step in and create a more negative contact. That there's several agendas going on between several species. I can't say exactly that if you were to say the good and the bad, I would say there was more of a positive slant with some of the contacts I've had suggesting that yes, they will assist us during this time of this traumatic event. Why they are doing that, I can't be certain. It would preserve humanity to some extent, certainly. I also feel that they have suggested that there is someone else coming that may have much more sinister intentions, but that whatever is going to be happening is going to be revealed in the next few years. I have, on a number of occasions, seen other human beings. I have seen two of my relatives. My father, before he died, I saw in one of my experiences on a craft. I have seen another relative of mine on a craft. There has been several instances where they have tested me by showing me my brother in an experience, but it was not real. As time goes on, you begin to understand, you begin to get a different feel for when you're being tested, and they're affecting you. They're affecting your brain somehow, your neurological processes to make you believe that you're seeing or experiencing something. After time, you kind of get a feel for the difference. But yes, there's been a few of my relatives I've seen. I have often seen human beings more so. I have seen them around large tables where I've been sitting. I've seen them mainly in unconscious states while I have been consciously interacting. It's as though people were waiting for their turn at this testing, and they would be unconscious. I have seen hysterical people. I have also been in, which is, as time has gone on, I have had some very interesting experiences in the last 3 or 4 years that I never had before, that appeared. I was on military bases. I've had experiences of being underground and seeing large crafts being built underground in gigantic caverns.
On the Earth?
On the Earth. So these experiences have taken on over time, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. Now that I'm really present with it and addressing it, There are suddenly military personnel that seem to be present in a number of my experiences. It's taken on, things are going in a different direction for me now that I'm standing up talking about it and experiencing, so I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening. But I mean, I've even so much as I've found myself in underground places where, and I've been really fighting to stay conscious, in and out of consciousness, where I've seen other people dressing in what looked like locker rooms and being taken out into large rooms where military, human military, I say military, not necessarily wearing traditional uniforms, a different style of uniform I've seen. I've also seen what appeared to be military personnel and people behaving in a way you might expect trained military people to behave. You know, they have mannerisms, the way they behave, wearing different types of shirts with insignia on the sleeve. These things have only happened in the last couple of years. None of that ever happened before. But now that I'm talking about this, it's interesting. There's a different element coming into play. Well, I'd like to clarify one thing for me is that I've had these experiences. They've been very unwelcome in my life from day one. This is not something I would choose to have. I'm a very conservative person. This is not something that fits into my life. A lot of resistance. Now I have a strong level of acceptance. I cannot say that I have come to the place where I am absolutely confident in all of these recollections. I cannot confidently, beyond a shadow of a doubt, say that specifics are absolutely happening. All I can do is hypothesize about it, and I feel that it's certainly worthy of investigation. Back to the question as to whether or not I believe humanity or human beings, governments may be interacting. Do I think that's possible? Is that evident in some of my experiences? I would say it looks that way. I'm getting that sense that there may be some cooperation between human beings and some of these species. I've seen a couple of very interesting underground situations. One of them that totally appeared man-made, with what I would relate to as a man-made elevator in a very, very deep chamber, an actual man-made elevator you step on and go down into the earth with. That was not anything that looked alien. There was no alien beings involved in this. It was all human beings on the elevator going down with me. This particular experience happened only on one occasion, and it happened recently, about 6 months ago. Very unusual and very disturbing experience. Once underground in these gigantic caverns, I was able to see, again, I saw no alien beings or extraterrestrial type life form. I saw only human beings. And in this cavern that was absolutely gigantic, I saw a very unusual craft that appeared to be a flying craft that was just humongous proportions, with that was being worked on at a distance by many, many people, perhaps 100 workers working on this particular craft. It was a much more involved experience than that, but that certainly relates to humans that I've seen. I have seen 3 types of what I would consider alien crafts, 3 types. I've seen them at a distance, and I've seen them from the inside. As far as I've seen a saucer-type craft that appeared to be, I only saw a portion of it. It was very foggy and difficult for me to turn my head or to look at the actual size of it as it was on the ground. I certainly saw that on my first experience in Sedona. This was a saucer-type craft, and if I was to guess the size of it, I would say this portion that I could sense might have been 500 feet wide that I could see the area. When an opening was revealed, I could not originally see that opening or any. I couldn't see any cracks in the side of the craft, and it appeared when it opened suddenly that there was an opening there that you couldn't see on the outside of the craft. It was a very shiny. I can't say very shiny. It's more like a dull gunmetal kind of color. I've seen that type of craft. Never up in the sky, only close up a portion of it. And from the inside, it was a very, I've seen what appeared to be round walls. It's as though there's a center point. A lot of consoles seem to be built right along what you might envision if you were to envision two saucers together, one on top of the other, two bowls. Right along that center line is where I've noticed a lot of control panels. Lighting is very dim. There's no specific, you can never see where a light is coming from, but there's certainly light present, but it's very indirect light. You can never see exactly where it comes from. When I've sat at tables, even the tables look as though they're made of glass or they're made of acrylic, sort of, and there's a light that emanates from within them, and you can't see the light source. Some of the what I call symbol boxes that have been set in front of me that are rectangular, 2 or 3 inches in thickness, maybe 12, 14 inches long, 8 inches wide, containing symbols that I am to look at. Those kinds of learning devices or programming devices, they also have lights emanating from them. But the craft appears to be very round, and the walls slope down. I have seen from a distance only 2 other types of crafts. One appeared to look like a boomerang. I've seen actually standing out in San Fernando Valley. In one of my experiences, a conscious recalled experience of standing out on the street before I went into this altered state, and I believe I was taken on that experience. I saw a large mother craft over Ventura Boulevard at night, somewhere approximately in Sedona Arizona area, and where generally that's the area where I was living at the time. And I saw a craft that was somewhat boomerang in shape, very dark in the sky, but I saw it open up and I saw smaller craft come out of it that were very similar in shape but much smaller, and I saw them move across the sky trailing behind. And I saw one other type of craft that was like a cigar-shaped craft in the sky, that had actually seemed to have glass windows around the front where you could see movement inside, almost figures through it. It's tough to judge distance, but I would say from where I was standing, I would say up in the sky it was probably, from where I was standing, it must have been massive because it looked perhaps as big as 3 inches, 2.5, 3 inches up in the sky, which would have made it quite large. And I could see in the windows and a light coming out of the front of the windows. As to whether or not, the question as to whether or not I consider this friendly contact or helpful contact, I would say initially, basically I'm very offended by it. It's an intrusion into my life. I would much rather not have had it ever happened. I feel, and I have for a very long time, I'm very offended and I feel very victimized by a number of the procedures. One of the things that I think is missing here is that I understand that cooperation between species would be very, very challenging and difficult because the evolution of humanity is such that we do not, in our society, generally acknowledge other life forms. So it's not, it's not taught to our children. It's not an acceptable fact in society at large. So therefore, We're fearful. Contact is fearful. So if entities want to contact humanity or humans, of course, they're going to feel they need to subdue us in order to do that, because most people are going to react with terror, as I did. They're going to be frightened, full of terror. Now, I understand that, and I've come to understand certainly that there are people that see these as spiritual experiences. There are some people that welcome it. There are some people that have not been frightened of it or afraid of it. For me, that was not the case. I can only speak for myself. Nobody asked me. Nobody invited me. Now, how would I have reacted if a being suddenly appeared and said, "We'd like to take you aboard my ship"? Would I be terrified? Would I be frightened? Yes, I would. But I might have approached it differently. I might have thought about it. So basically, what is missing here is this has been forced upon me. I've been, in essence, held captive by this. I have given no choice in the matter. Now, as time has gone on, the question as to whether or not I could see this as good in my life. I live very committed to a spiritual life, and I have for a very, very long time. That area of my life, developing my spiritual side, has been very important to me in my entire life, and it's taken me to a lot of different places. I have studied Buddhism, Christianity, a variety of different religions, and I've come to a place where I have meditated many years, and I'm very comfortable in a relationship that I have with a higher power, with an intelligent and loving creator. One of the biggest challenges is trying to integrate. How do I integrate these contacts? Yes, I have felt that it's been an intrusion. I was not invited. Nobody asked my opinion. This experience has been forced upon me. And I've certainly resented what appears to be genetic material being taken from me, the idea or the thought that perhaps my genetic material is being used to create other beings, hybrids perhaps, without my permission, is very disturbing and offensive to me, manipulative. But because my spiritual path is what it is and has been for all of my life, it's important that I find a way to integrate this. So 6 years ago when I came out with this, I knew that that had to be the goal. A principle either is or it isn't. So therefore, if I am confident, and I am, of my relationship with the Almighty Creator, confident that it is ultimately good and positive, creative, loving, confident that this Creator desires nothing more than to produce in a positive, good way to extend itself and outreach itself into greater and greater expression, then this situation has to fit in there somehow. So part of my resolution, and I would call it a resolution, there was a need for me to resolve this contact, to put a place in my life overall, to be able to live day to day, and to be able to find out where is this in the scheme of things, of creation. I have been able to take what I conceived as a negative, frightening intrusion, unwelcome, and turn it into a journey, which I never anticipated from the beginning. So it has become part of my life journey and my spiritual journey. I'm committed to, for the rest of my life, exploring this phenomenon. I believe, and this is my belief, that somebody has asked me, I've been asked several different times by different people, do I believe they have a soul, these different entities? Do I believe their God is my God? My answer is yes. Yes. I believe the Creator, the life force, is present inherently within all living beings, all things, even within inanimate objects. The life force is present. I absolutely, totally trust and am confident of my Creator. that I came from, that I will return to. I believe that all of these beings have also come from the Creator. And that although we cannot see it now, it's difficult enough for us to unite on this planet, among races, on this planet in humanity, let alone for us to unite amongst other species. But I believe that is the goal. I believe that is the goal of the Creator. I believe their lives, no matter who or where they're at in their evolution, is just as valuable as ours. That's where I've come. I think they're in varying degrees. There's varying degrees of evolution within the different species. We find that on the planet with all the variety of species on this planet. So therefore, principle either is or it isn't. So therefore, life is created. God has created all of these species on this planet. And I believe created all of the species in other worlds, perhaps other dimensions. And I think we are all connected. That's the connection I'm trying to find now. Find ways to integrate this into my life. I'm learning, and I think I'm pretty comfortable now about living my life, my day-to-day here, knowing this is part of my life and my life work. I don't know where it's going to take me. I'm totally comfortable with this now, what's happening to me. I pay attention more now. My intention is very different with it. I may be here perhaps to serve some greater need or their need should some tremendous, event take place on the planet, but I now have my own agenda as a human being, my own agenda as a spiritual being to pursue this thing, to understand it, to write about it, to talk about it, to draw what I see, to convey what I've experienced. And it's much bigger, much greater than I ever anticipated. And I am becoming much more comfortable overall with it. I had, for many years, what I believed was a reoccurring dream. And in this dream, what I believed was a dream, and we're talking about in my 30s. In my 30s, I had what I thought was a dream, and I used to write about this child. In this dream, now this is long before, this would have been in the 80s, the early 80s, throughout the 80s, good 10 years prior to my experience in Sedona. I'd had what I thought was a dream. And it was a repeating dream where I would see the same child. The child was about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old, a female. She had very bad skin. I would be in a room full of people. I could never quite tell who was around, but I would have this child standing in front of me. This child's skin was in a very bad condition. She wore what looked like a little cotton shift type dress. She had blondish hair that was very sparse on her head, very stringy, very little bit of hair on her head. You could see a lot of the scalp showing through. There was a deep sadness about this child. I had had a number of dreams prior to Sedona about her, and I was very deeply moved by this child. In one of these dreams, that I believe was a dream, I was so overwhelmed by her that I picked her up, I sat her in my lap, and the connection and the love was amazing. And in this experience, I absolutely, totally committed that I would love her, no matter what. Now, I even wrote poetry about this child. And I assumed that this child was some part of my psyche working itself out from other areas of my life. It may perhaps she represented a part of me, my inner child, as they refer to. I wasn't certain. Well, many years later, after the Sedona experience, as these contacts continued, I was in one of these experiences that appeared to be on a craft. I was sitting at a table. There was a tall white there, and there was this insectoid being that has been present throughout, sitting at the opposite of this table. There is what looked like a doorway behind him, and a female walks out. This was my first encounter with what I later understood was a hybrid. This experience, I can't recall exactly when this happened, but it happened sometime within the last 10 years or so. And she walked out, and she looked absolutely identical to that little child that I recalled seeing in dreams. Only in this instance, she appeared to be in her early 20s. She appeared to be partially human. She had the same blonde hair, but it was almost shaved, like half an inch off of her head. The same eyes, and her eyes were a strange blue color.